Hi everyone, I'm Vicky. My current role is head of school. I work at West Lea, which is the school for children with special needs up in Enfield. The school is pretty big. It's a lot bigger now than what it was when I first started. But basically we have a model where we have an executive head, a deputy executive head, and then we have three heads of school. The heads of school all lead a different campus. So my role is to lead Meridian campus, which is our campus for primary age children. And when I started the role, it was a brand new campus that came about because of the need for more spaces for children with special educational needs within Enfield. So the school expanded and split their primary campus away from the Key Stage 3 campus. So it then what I'm going to do is talk you through some of the things I sort of learned very early on, and then I'm going to touch on some sort of key takeaways for me, things that I've drawn on from leadership coaches I've had in the past, etc. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about like now and the changes since those first 100 days, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end for you to ask any questions. Maybe we'll have a bit of time to reflect on your own journeys and some next steps for you guys. So I thought in terms of where to start, I went to the school, West Lea, in sort of the summer term, June and July, and spent some time with the Sue, the executive head, with Sarah James, who's going to be my assistant head, and I also went on a couple of day trips with the children to sort of get the sense for the children. Prior to West Lea, I came from a mainstream background. I was in a primary school in Newham, and my only real experience of special needs was working with the children within that primary school. But it was a real passion because I felt like the primary curriculum wasn't really meeting their needs. And as hard as the teachers work, to be a classroom teacher in a mainstream class is such a huge job. The children with the special needs were often left with really quite unqualified TAs, and they were asked to almost develop and lead on the curriculum for those children. So I felt there must be another way. And Newham didn't really particularly have too many special schools, so I applied for this job in Enfield. And to be honest, I haven't looked back at all. I absolutely love working with the children with special needs, and our children are the children who we have got aspirations to be able to work and live as independently as they can, to be able to hold conversations and form friendships. So they're the sorts of children who, in year 6, they may be working on a year 2, year 3 curriculum. Some of them are a little bit less able than that, but they are able to access, in terms of sort of GCSEs, there's the qualifications that sit just below GCSE level. So the sort of functional skills, sorts of level 1 functional skills. So, they have got a good grasp of English and maths, although aren't at the point academically where they could go on to achieve highly when it comes to any sort of GCSE. So it's a bit of context. So I thought over the summer, with it being a building site, that I would go and pop in and meet Sarah at our new site, talk through a little bit of West Lea, have like sort of first impressions of each other, but also of the site, trying to get a sense of where we might be ready for when our staff come in. So I thought I'd pop to Costa, it'd be good first impression. You start with a coffee. However, whilst I was in the Costa car park, I got stopped by the police because I had the wrong number plates on my car, which I realised in talking to the police had been for 3 years. So I probably got away with all sorts of driving infringements over the course of that 3 years. But basically 2 letters at the end of my number plate were the wrong way around. So for the first time ever in my life, I actually blamed it on my dyslexia. I've never blamed my dyslexia for anything. I've always just embraced it and got on with it with life. But I actually told the police officer that I'm dyslexic and I never noticed that these 2 letters were the wrong way around. There's a confession for everybody. So yes, the police basically said, go to the garage now, get it sorted out. So that's what I did, but it meant I was 2 hours late with 2 very cold coffees to meet Sarah on our first day at our new campus. The campus was a mess. Like the site was an absolute mess. It's a converted church that had half been converted already for a local primary school whilst they waited for their new build. And the other half was basically one big hall that was going to be split into 3 classrooms. On the first day in September, there was no internet, there was no phone lines, there was no secure fencing around the front of the school. There was like a 2-foot picket fence, and that was our boundary fencing. 3 of the classrooms had furniture, 3 of them didn't. The builders were still on site, and the amount of resources was shocking, like considering we were going to open a week later for our children. So we're in a real position where teachers walking in just sort of put their head on the table and go, where do we start? Like we can't even print a resource. So where do we start with trying to create visual timetables, behaviour ladders? So it's quite, not only did I not feel ready, because everyone gets some sort of first day nerves, it was clear that the site wasn't ready at all. But I think the thing really was that we had this young, inexperienced, but really energetic bunch of staff. And that really kind of, that really got a lot of youthful, inexperienced sort of bubbliness going, which was really quite helpful, because then it was just kind of a case of, okay, what do we do? What do we need to do first? And people started to sort of get on with jobs. But then I think in terms of my leadership, one of the real important things for me was to be really honest with my staff. So right from the beginning, I told them about me background. I was very honest with them in you know, SEN wasn't my specialism. It was a passion, but it wasn't something I knew a huge amount about. I said to them, don't ask me about an EHCP because I won't know the answer. But I basically told them I'm here to learn, and I'm here to create a really good campus for our children, to help them learn, to help them gain the life experiences that we can. And then from that, and from the honesty, that sort of honest conversation I had with my staff, I then held one-to-one conversations with every single one of them. And that was from the class teachers, my assistant head, to the people in my office, the site supervisor. And I wanted to find out what their motive was. What were they passionate about? Why did they pick West Lea of all of the schools to work at? Why West Lea? And those conversations gave me a really interesting insight into each of them as individuals, each of them in terms of their experience and in terms of their strengths and where they felt they wanted to develop, but also around their motives. And it was the motives then that I was able to really work with in terms of being able to then focus where we were going to go. The other thing that was really important for me to do was to ask for help. As I said, I didn't really have any sort of specialist experience going into an SEN school. So I asked for help. I asked for help from anybody who would pick up the phone to me some days. And that was really to sort of to be able to have the answers people were seeking from me, but also so I could find out as much information as I could as quickly as possible to upskill myself. That help came from various forms, from some of the most experienced TAs in the school who'd been there 10, 15 years, to a family liaison officer, the executive head, my fellow heads of school in the same sort of role as me. And then I think the most important person, the most important ally I had at the time was Sarah, my assistant head. We formed a partnership quite quickly. She was the one with the SEN experience, and I was the one with the primary background. So we came together quite well, and we were able to really support and learn from each other. But I think that she, like, without her around, I would have found the job a whole lot harder. Now, I think some of that is probably down to good fortune, but I think some of that was about the relationship that we built together and sharing that vision for what I wanted for Dyson's Road, in order to work collaboratively on it. So we set ourselves jointly our sort of development plan for that first year, setting some really high expectations, but we made sure that they were realistic. Like, so for example, the school is built, as I said, the school's built around sort of learning for life skills, and I felt that every child on the campus should be going out on a weekly, if not weekly, fortnightly visit into the community. So for simple things, for example, learning to cross the road, going to the corner shop to buy some ingredients, going on, helping them learn about how to access public transport. Some of the things that as an adult and as a child in a mainstream, we sort of take just take for granted, particularly something like going on the tube. Like, I've been on so many visits in mainstream where I never even thought that children would find that a challenge to go on the tube. And that wasn't part of the journey. It was just to get to the science museum. It wasn't, but actually our children needed to learn about that part of the journey. So much learning came from that. So it was really important that we jointly had those expectations, because then we're able to work with other people. And something that a leadership coach taught to me years ago was about finding flowers. And she said to me that people generally fall into being a flower or a stone. And it's not to say the stones are not ever going to change, but it's about finding the people who are your flowers, who you're going to be able to grow quickly and who are going to be on side and be willing to be the people who are going to try things out in the classroom. So if we were going to make sure our children were going out on educational visits, I needed to find a class teacher who was going to be on board and willing to do that, and willing to take that sort of initial gamble to then show everyone else how it can be done. And that for me still is now. It's absolutely for me about working with people who are flowers, who want to grow, who want to be on board. And then the people who are stones, they're not necessarily people who are underperforming. They're just the people that might take that little bit longer to get on board. So the people who might need to just step back and watch someone else do it, who might need that little bit more encouragement, that little bit more support. And of course, some people do need to be challenged with their behaviours, with their teaching and learning, with their aspirations, and then that sort of falls within sort of a performance management situation. I think something else that I learned really quickly was that I really had to acknowledge the difficult stuff, like had to recognise how difficult it is to teach a group of children when your internet isn't there, or when we eventually got internet, it was cutting out all the time, or that makes life difficult. And we had to then be realistic with that and sort of saying, I know this is really difficult. These are expectations, try your best, but I know that you're not going to get your classroom set up and learning be incredible by the end of week 2, because that's not realistic. Actually, you're going to need that little bit longer. And that, again, that's something I always think now in terms of today, in the situation we're in with our, we absolutely have got the expectation that all of our children are engaged in learning either online or on site. But I know, like everyone else, there's all sorts of stumbling blocks that are along the way. So looking where the improvements are, from last week to this week, we've got a 10% increase in uptake. That's a big deal. That's something we need to celebrate. And then next week it'll be another 10% uptake. And then before sort of the next 2 or 3 weeks before they come around, we'll be at 100%. And that's the point when we can really go, brilliant, we've met our expectations. I think as well, something that's really that sticks with me quite a lot is breaking things down into small steps in terms of managing change, but also in terms of improving teaching and learning. It was the first sort of term or so. It was really interesting. The 2 other campuses were really sort of motoring along with their teaching and learning, and it would have been easy for me to kind of go, okay, like we need to up our game a bit. But with everything else going on, we needed to take a much more small step approach and break things down for the teachers so that then they could see themselves being successful. In the first slide, as mentioned, I didn't have a huge amount of experience, and I didn't want to scare anybody off or feel that working in a special school wasn't for them, because working in a special school, it is so different to working in a mainstream school. You are essentially a Senko from the day you walk into the classroom, because you have the responsibility of those children's EHCPs. You're also a parent liaison officer, because you've got to work so closely with parents every day to make sure that there's a consistency between home and school. You're also a healthcare professional, and you have to get involved in administering medication or supporting children with toileting skills, which are all skills that can be unique to special school, dependent on your experience in a mainstream school. There can also be something you did experience in mainstream school and be a motive to come into working in a special school. But in order to increase the quality of the teaching and learning, we had to really, really break it down into those small steps. I think the other thing that is super important to me, which I try to do as much as possible in them first 100 days and also now, is to look for the opportunities to have some fun. Teaching and being a teacher, being in a school in any role really, it's an incredibly challenging profession. No 2 hours are the same, let alone 2 days. So we looked for opportunities to have fun, and my assistant heads joke with me now saying I'm always looking for forced fun, and I think sometimes it is a little bit of forced fun, but I used like inset days to try to be a bit creative. We did like a ready steady cook inset day. We went up to the forest for another training day, but looking for opportunities to almost model what I want for the children through our professional development for the staff. Okay, and then something that really sort of sums up me and what I wanted West Lea Meridian campus to be about was on the left, that's about equality with everybody getting the same, but actually on the right it's about equity. And our young people actually they all need something different in order for them to be able to achieve their EHCP targets. And for us, it's about providing that difference in a personalized way. So I shared this with them on the first day, and I think this really this is still something I have up on my wall to remind me, but also to remind everyone else that actually we're looking for the bits that are going to work for them individual children. So then sort of now, and how I would reflect now looking back, like, it's mental now. You know, anybody that works in a school would probably have to say the same reflection. When all of a sudden whereas before Christmas, before this sort of second COVID variation came around, it felt like we were going to be able to get back to our strategic plans. It felt like we were going to be able to get a sense of sort of a normality back into school, and actually be able to think about what the next 6 months, what the next year looks like. But instead, we've been thrown back into this sort of ever-changing, ever-evolving situation where we're all of a sudden having to conduct testing. So, you know, we've as well as delivery drivers and IT technicians and teachers and everything else, we're now also healthcare professionals. But, you know, I wouldn't change it. I think, like, to be a leader now, although it's been the most challenging year, or it's probably been the most challenging 3 years now of my career, I wouldn't change it. I feel like we are really the center of our family's worlds at the moment, and to be able to offer that to people is really, really a privilege. The learning from them first 100 days, I had to put back into practice in September 2019 when I opened up 2 new sites. And that was a challenge, doing 2 together, but all of that learning around how important it was to have good induction processes, how important it was to hold them conversation, to find out people's motives. All of that was really important again in September 2019 as we grew. But I think some of the biggest learns over the last 4 years, not 3 years, sorry, not just the sort of them first 100 days, was about the importance of having some form of strategic plan. I think that is really key. That because you can be knocked off track by all sorts of things on a daily basis. So actually having a plan and being prepared to stick with that plan, not stick with it no matter what, but stick with it in terms of another new initiative comes along. Actually, does it fit into your strategic plan? If it doesn't, then park it to one side. And then also something that is very specific to special school, I feel, is about using our expertise. I remember seeing an EP maybe once a term in mainstream, not even that, and often I'd be told to do a visual timetable for a child. We now see experts on a weekly, if not daily basis, and using those to put together a whole package for the children has been so important. But I think ultimately, in my role, I've got to remember that, like, I'm in charge. So yes, the people can come in with all sorts of different ideas, all sorts of different advice, and for some, sometimes it's been overwhelming. But ultimately, it is down to me making the decisions with and for my teachers. And then being brave and bold with the decisions then that we do make. And if I'm just thinking an example with an EP with some advice, we didn't feel it would work for us or the family. So, you know, being bold and saying that's not going to work for us, that's really important. And then I think it is important as leaders that we're all flowers ourselves, that we've got to be flexible and open to change. We've got to be flexible and open to growth. Because if we don't have that sort of mindset, then we can't expect it from anyone else. That we've got to be the person that we want our people, in terms of the people below us. We've got to be the person that we want them to be. We've got to model things for them. And then my biggest growth, I think, over the first 100 days, was about eating the frog. I think it's a great phrase that I have up in my room still now. And for me, the frog was probably a common frog with other people around sort of conflict avoidance and, oh, I'll do it tomorrow if it was a bit more of a difficult conversation. But actually, I've learned that you've got to do it now, because that's when you're actually going to, like, there will be no tomorrow. You've got to do those things now. So have them conversations now. Ring that parent back who you know is going to be shouting at you down the phone because they'd rather have a food voucher rather than a food parcel. Like, you've got to eat those frogs. Identify the frogs and then eat them now rather than saving them for later. So that is a bit of a whistle stop from me, because I thought it would be, I'm just going to stop sharing, thought it would be really, really helpful to take some questions, or if there's any certain points I've mentioned that anyone wants me to go into a bit more detail. Yeah, please sort of like ask away. Don't all shout at once.
Hiya, I'm going to talk if that's okay.
Hi, Laurie. Yeah, please do. Otherwise, it's awkward silence the next.
No, I know it's horrible, isn't it? Oh, it's hard enough doing these things in this way, but yeah, the silence is yuck. It's not really a question. It's more just sort of reflecting on what you're saying. What I've really sort of taken from you is that idea of, you know, use all the resources around you. You're not on your own. It's all about building, you know, those good relationships with all the stakeholders, and also that sense of humility that you don't know everything, and that's absolutely okay. And it's about sort of owning it. I just wanted to kind of share that.
Yeah, and I think for me that's really, really important. And I think and everyone's very individual, and I completely appreciate that as well. But I think I wouldn't feel in a comfortable or natural position if I was going to kind of put on a front all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't suit me at all to kind of. We're being recorded, so I don't want to swear, but you know, it wouldn't suit me to sort of put on that front and sort of wing it almost. I need the time. I need the time to be able to say, I don't know that right now. Yeah. I'll go away and I'll find out for you. Or as my staff have sort of grown in their own abilities and confidence levels as well. Actually, have you got an idea? Have you got a solution for that? And that seems to work quite well for me. But I know that's for me. I know if you put me into a huge secondary school, for example, I might, in a similar sort of role, it might not be an approach that works quite as well. It might be, I don't know. I've got no plans to trying it out though. So any questions?
How do you know that you wanted to work in a school like that? Especially when you said that the only experience you had was to work with students in primary school, with just the SEN students in primary school. Yeah. So how did you transform to be a school leader with an expertise? I know you said you work with one of the SEN lead and you learn from each other, but what made you take that leap?
So I finished my MPQH in the January and had a great head teacher at the time, and had a really open conversation about what was next. And I think I really it was a real lack of confidence I had in terms of going off to be a head, like in my own right. And I don't know, I don't think I was ready as such. I don't think there's ever really been a fully ready. And it was because I'm dyslexic, I'd always had this sort of passion and interest. And then literally I thought, and I was talking to her and I said, right, I've got two choices. I can go be a deputy somewhere, or I can try something different and look at maybe like an alternative provision or a special school. And I thought, you know, I don't want to go be a deputy anywhere else. I think I'll just end up getting frustrated really quickly, because I still wouldn't have the level of expectation and ownership over decision making as what I wanted. And I felt like it was, I don't necessarily believe in luck, but I think like there was just something that was like fate about it all, because I went off onto TS and then this job I've got now popped up that day. And I just, and it was literally kind of going, that interests me. I like the sound of the school. I'm going to go and have a look around. And it came from that passion of with my dyslexia, knowing how I struggled in school, with working with the children who had got special needs, thinking actually there must be something else for them. Let me go and apply. And then in my head, I thought, you know, 2 years, I'll do that for 2 years. And then I'll look at going back into mainstream potentially as a head teacher. And then what a lot of experience I can bring back into the mainstream then too. But then over sort of the first couple of years, I very quickly decided I've got no real desire to go back into mainstream. I'm actually at the moment looking for a headship of my own in a special school. I would never, I'm not going to rule it out about going back to mainstream at all, because I think mainstream, working in a mainstream primary school, it's such a rewarding job. It really isn't. But I think at the moment, the special school feels even more rewarding. So it was basically passion that drove me towards it.
My next question is, how do you know what are your first 100 days are going to look like? Do you have that pre-planned, or do you go first in the school and observe before you make your 100 days?
So I think,
what's your advice?
So for me, I very much wanted to go in and do a lot of observation of what's happening. It was an established school. It was rated outstanding by Ofsted, so I knew there was some really good stuff that was going on for those children. So for me, it was about going in, observing what is going on, and then I had sort of two things that I really wanted to look at, and then to potentially be focuses, and that was about the curriculum and about professional development, because they're sort of my two passions. And so yes, it was in them one-to-one conversations, walking in and out of classes, talking to everyone I could. And then at that point, that's when I developed a plan in collaboration with my assistant head for the curriculum, and then with the CPD, I needed to work with the other heads of school and deputy and executive head. That one was really quite challenging, because, and still now it's probably the biggest challenge in if I've got something that I'm passionate about and want to implement, it's a challenge to then work alongside other people when they've got that same sort of level of passion and things they want to implement, to then kind of work. So it's joined up, but it's not it's joined up, and it fits into our whole school sort of vision and values and our whole school development plan. So at times things look a bit different, and we have ownership over things. At other times I've had to do things and then tell people after. But overall it's been an interesting journey. It has been a really interesting journey. I think if you were going to go into school as a head teacher, or as a assistant head, or if you've got a specific role, my advice would be to find out what's happening, because there's a reason why that school is in that place it's in, whether that be an outstanding school or whether it's a school that's requiring improvement. But you've got to find out, because if you go in gung-ho without really any knowledge, you're going to really upset people, particularly the teachers. If you go in and sort of go, oh, this is a brilliant assessment tool I've used before, and then you just try and push that straight out to teachers, you're going to really upset a lot of people. I think you've got to start from building relationships and finding out what's already happening, what's already working.
Thank you.
I've got another question. Do you think the skills that you have acquired in your headship role in the school you're in would transfer to mainstream, or do you think that it's quite unique working in a provision like yours?
I think there's leadership skills that are easily transferable. You know, in terms of developing relationships, managing conflict, you know, good ways of looking at performance management, CPD. I think the curriculum is very different, and almost the way we can work, because like when I left mainstream, it was we had a couple of years of using the new end of year expectations, and it felt like that in mainstream it was getting more and more that was the focus, like, and you were trying to teach children to reach some end of year expectations, whereas for me, I can look at a child and go, what does that child need? And then we set the EHCP targets, and it's how can our provision and curriculum help that child meet their EHCP targets. So that sort of is a different mindset. But I think there's so much about good leadership that you can transfer from setting to setting. And then coming into West Lea, that was the bit that I used as my strength. Those skills I'd built as a deputy head in a mainstream, brought those in, but then learned about the stuff that makes sort of West Lea, and like you would learn about why the mainstream school is that mainstream school. Yeah. Is there any other questions? No. Where are you based, Laura? What's your current role?
I am deputy head at a primary school called Ellingham Primary in Chessington, just on the outskirts of southwest London.
And I'm sorry, names disappear when you don't talk. When I'm really bad. I'm dyslexic. I'm going to use it again as an excuse. I'm really sorry. I'm going to pronounce your name completely wrong.
Sukaina.
Sukaina. Sorry, Sukaina.
Yeah.
Sukaina, what's your role?
I am a vice principal at Langdon Academy. It's an all-through school in East London. Okay. But I am more connected with the secondary school.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we've got Teo, what's your role?
I'm in a primary school, a Judge Mitchell primary school phase leader. I was interested in seeing how this implementation, because actually I'm looking at moving on to deputy head, hopefully in September. But at the same time, so I was trying to see how transferable these things are, and what are the things, and I know some of these things are transferable, but at the same time, you know, it could be tricky, but it's always nice to hear from someone who's done it, and the kind of challenges you faced. And it was quite interesting. I particularly like the one about when you were stopped by the police and
Teo, I'd say go for it. If you think you're not doing it, go for it, because I think that's for me. I think there's lots of people who kind of wait and go, oh, I just need this experience, I just need that experience, I just need to do this. Actually, don't just go for it, because you learn so much on the job, much you can learn on the job. You know, I mean, yeah, I definitely go for it.
I just think SCN schools are it's just so much work. I remember about 10 years ago or so, 10 or 12 years ago, I went for an interview in an SCN school in Muswell Hill, and I got the job. But I then said I wanted to observe what the whole day would look like. I just looked at it and I was like, it's incredibly exhausting. I didn't take the job in the end because I just felt, nah, thanks, but no thank you.
Yeah.
I think you guys do way more than what we do in the mainstream, because they're so individually unique and they've got their individual challenges, and you've got to make sure there's some form of progress, one form or another. And I just feel this will do my head in. Like, I was like,
I think Tayo, you made a really interesting point then, really, in that you've got to make sure the school you're applying for is the right one for you. So you went, and I think you did absolutely the right thing in saying, can I actually just spend a day here to find out what's going on? Because you've got, like, you know, you spend the vast majority of your time at school, or if you're not at school, you're at home thinking about school. So yeah, so I think that's a really good point then, Tayo, that you have to make sure that it is the right place. And then when you find the right place, you can talk. You will talk passionately about it. Like,
Exactly.
I would say now, coming into special school, I think that looking at what my mainstream colleagues are doing, I think that there's the other way around almost, that I can't right now imagine going back into mainstream.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got a good work-life balance. It feels professionally, I'm ready for my next steps, and it just feels like I'm in my zone working in the special school. Yeah, so it's interesting. Your reflections are almost the other way around, but I think that's probably what people would say about secondary and primary, and just then how personalized our careers all are, that you have to make sure the school is the right one for you.
Well, I think that secondary schools have a really hard job, especially when you have a secondary school that has an hub, and they want us to teach SEN students in our mainstream classes, and we had to balance that work in terms of ensuring that they too are making progress, and sometimes lack of CPD, it's really hard for those secondary school teachers. Whilst when you are in a special school, that's what you are working with. So there are systems in place for you to really ensure that it is successful. So for me, I think it's the opposite. It's us who are in secondary school and also have hub students in our classes that makes the job really, really difficult, because they have to balance teaching and learning, making sure that everybody in that classroom is making that progress that we want.
Yeah. Lorraine, what do you do?
I'm an assistant head teacher at the moment in a primary school.
Any aspirations to take the leap into deputy?
Not yes and no. I've been at my school a very, very long time. So I guess I'm a bit of a scaredy cat when it comes to taking that leap, and I often have a little look around and see what's out there and go, oh, that's tempting, and then talk myself out of it.
Talking yourself out of it is an interesting thing. I think I follow Women Ed. It started sort of on Twitter, but they do lots of conferences and stuff. So I've attended a few and presented at a few of those, and they talk a lot about that idea that you sort of talk yourself out of it. And not to offend you, Teo, at all, but there's a lot of research around how men will look at a job description, sort of tick 2 or 3 things and go, yeah, I can do that, whereas women do look and go, actually, I need to do all 10 things. And I think there's a lot to be said in that. I think, and I'm sure there's that, it's a stereotype almost. It's not necessarily the truth for everybody, but it does. Again, talking from experience, I think there is an element of looking to try to tick the list, which is why I said to Teo, like, just go for it. I think it's got to be the right place, but I would definitely say take that leap, Lorraine.
It's daunting, I guess, because I've been at the same place for so long, and I'm happy there. So it's sort of like I've seen other colleagues leave and then get in touch and say, oh, it's horrible, don't leave. That is it's about finding the right place and the right opportunity,
and I think there's no rush to do that either. Like, take your time to find the right place.